السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. عندما تتكلم راما يصبح جزءا من الكون واعيا لذاته، فالجمهور لا يستمع إلى كلماتها فحسب، بل ويدرك على الفور أهمية وجوهرية ما تقول. الفن وقدرته على تحويل النزاع وإعادة بناء المجتمعات المهشمة، مع الأستاذة راما ماني من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا.
Get down! Get down! I saw every single bomb falling.
25 عاما من الخبرة المعمقة في مجال الحكم والأمن دفعت الأستاذة راما ماني إلى تطوير ما سمته مسرح التحول، وهو وسيلة مبتكرة لمعالجة الأزمات العالمية الخطيرة.
55 bombs every day.
هو مسرح تسعى من خلاله راما ماني الشاعرة والفنانة المتخصصة بالأداء المسرحي لإشراك أناس من خلفيات متنوعة لتحويل الأزمات إلى فرص. راما ماني شغلت منصب مستشارة الاستراتيجية العليا لمركز الحوار الإنساني في جنيف المعني بمعالجة قضايا الوساطة في النزاع الإنساني، وهي من كبار الباحثين في مركز الدراسات العالمية بجامعة أكسفورد، ومن مؤسسي المبادرة العالمية نهضة النساء نهضة العالم، التي تضم نساء قائدات ممن كرسن أنفسهن للعمل معا لإيجاد عالم يصلح للجميع. أطلق عليها لقب الوكيل الكوني للصحوة والمحفز للتحول. هي تستنهض الحواس المخدرة من خلال أدائها الحيوي المسرحي الذي تجسد فيه قضايا إنسانية شائكة، وتحفز جمهورها لإعادة تدوين رواياتهم وبحماسة، وبالتالي إعادة تشكيل المستقبل المشترك للإنسانية. راما ماني تحدثنا أكثر من الداخل عن مفهومي السلام والأمن، وتشرح ماهية مسرح التحول وكيف خلقت هذا المفهوم، وما هي أبرز الرسائل التي يرتكز عليها، وكيف تستخدم الأسلوب القصصي التمثيلي وسيلة للتحول، ولماذا، وما هي القضايا العالمية الأربع التي يتصدى لها هذا المسرح. Dr. Rama Mani, Counselor of the World Future Council and Senior Research Associate at the Center for International Studies at the University of Oxford and co-founder of Rising Women, Rising World. Welcome to Min الداخل from the inside, ma'am.
It's wonderful to be here, and I've been looking forward to meeting you, Zainab.
It's our pleasure, ma'am. Well, Dr. Rama, you are an internationally reputed scholar and practitioner of peace and security, actually two things that have become a dream in our societies, unfortunately. What can you tell us about the challenges of peace building today?
My gosh, you know, everywhere in this region especially and around the world, people are in a state of despair. It looks like there's too little peace. There are pieces. Things are falling to pieces, but there's no peace. And the only kind of security there is a very militarized one, a very violent one, which violates the security of human beings and of the planet itself. Yet, my profound discovery everywhere that I've worked, and especially in this region over this period of time, is that there is not simply hope, but there is transformation, both possible and already happening. And it depends on where we look, who we look at, and who we speak to.
And that is what you termed as the theater of transformation. When did you start with this idea? How did you come up with this idea? And what is actually meant by the theater of transformation?
Excellent question. You know, when we hear the word theater of transformation, we may think of two things. On the one hand, in this region which is full of war, we think of the theater of war. We think of the terrible things that are happening around, where life itself, society, has become the battleground, where no one is safe anywhere in their own homes because bombs could fall anywhere, because violence could break out anywhere. Or you think of the theater as the place you go to in peacetime to watch something happening.
To entertain yourself.
Exactly. To forget about reality, to live in someone else's world. For me, it's a little bit of a mix of the two. It's saying that we have the possibility of transforming the drama of war into a theatre of transformation, where we, instead of being victims or bystanders, can actually become the scriptwriters, can become the actors of a different possibility. And to do this, it uses theatre as the metaphor. So it's by looking at the real lives of people, the real stories of how we ourselves transform when we are in great crisis, and by transforming ourselves, transform our societies, that we can actually bring about transformation.
When did you start with this idea?
You know, it's funny because I spent how many years of my life, 25 years, as a policy advisor, a scholar, an activist even, working in different fields, but very much with the mind. So in a way you could say it started 15 years ago, 16 now, when I went as a policy advisor to work with a large humanitarian organization based in Ethiopia and then Uganda, but covering the wars all over Africa. And as I went talking on the one hand to policymakers, ministers, diplomats, but on the other hand to communities living and working in conflict, I began to see that there was something missing. And I realized that what was missing was the real human stories. What was missing was the soul, the art, the culture, which is actually what makes people what they are and what can help them to change conflict. So on one hand, this started 15 to 16 years ago, but actually what I call theatre of transformation only started literally 2.5 years ago.
I would appreciate here, Dr. Rama, if you can tell us about the main messages of this theatre of transformation. We will talk later perhaps about how the people interacted with this kind of method, of this kind of mixing the politics and the security issues and the peace with the acting or the enactment. But I would like you to focus more on the main messages.
Absolutely. So I would say that the core message is that every crisis is actually an opportunity for transformation. I would say that the core message is that there is always the possibility of transforming a situation, a conflict, and that possibility is realized when we are willing to transform ourselves. In order to...
So it's a matter of judging the wills of the people and the wishes of the people, whether wanting or not wanting. Yes. Or you try to help them or instigate them into moving into this phase of transformation.
Yes, of course, as you know, some people are willing. There is political will as well as public will. Very often the will is not there. But this is a way of evoking and inspiring and awakening that humanity which is in all of us, and the desire and the belief and possibility that we can find innovative and creative ways that could humanly and humanely address our crises. So the message is to awaken people to be both humane, but to be creative and innovative, to not get stuck in the old way of looking at things and doing things, and then we can change any situation. And with that approach, I look at what I see are probably 4 of the major challenges we face today in global peace and security, and use this as a way to awaken people's minds to find new solutions.
Of course, we will discuss these 4 different facets that you focused on fully, but how did you, Dr. Rama, you said that you are a policy advisor, a scholar, a practitioner, but not an artist. How did you manage, to bring about the art into these things and help transform?
It's such a heart-breaking, moving story that I would love to share that with you, especially here in the heart of the Middle East, the gem of the Middle East.
We have lots of stories in the Middle East, so you use the sense of the storytelling and enactment.
Yes. So what happened actually is for many, many years I've been dreaming of going to Jerusalem and Palestine. And I kept saying, you know what, I want to go to the Holy Land when it's a place of peace and justice. And my very, very dear friend who actually offered me this beautiful chain, Zahira Kamal, the first Minister of Women's Affairs of Palestine, the first woman in Palestine, and I believe in the region, to be the Secretary General of a political party, the Fidah Party. She said, Rama, I want you to come while I'm alive, so come now, I'm turning 70, you need to come. The stories I heard of every person I met primarily women, I met many men as well and young people, but every story of women from every background, from rural areas, from politics, academics, uneducated women, their experiences of what they had been through was so powerful. I had no idea, but I kept receiving them. And on the plane, I already started writing them down. And each, because the words were so powerful, each became a poem under my hands, but it was their words. It had simply become poetry. And when I arrived in Oxford, we were having a meeting of women, and the people said, share some of what you saw. And I started enacting. I started saying, I am Zainab. I am Intisar. The next thing I knew, within a month, I was asked to give a recital of some of these stories. And I put on the Palestinian dress that I had bought and Palestinian headdress. And I began to do this. And since then, this was December 20th, 2013 was my visit. January 2014 was my first recital. And since then, the stories of all the people, of course Palestinians, but in every conflict I've been in and worked in around the world, have come pouring through me. It may be someone I met in Beirut yesterday. It may be someone I met in Wajir, Kenya 25 years ago. But because everyone we meet still lives within us, their stories are still in us, and they come out to pass the message of their lives and inspire and touch others.
We would appreciate, Dr. Rama, if you could enact something, particularly when you talked about Palestine and this visit to the women, to the suffering women, and their ongoing suffering over there.
I would love to do that, and what you will see is most of my stories are actually not about the suffering. There is a lot of suffering, but it shows
the
how
power.
Ordinary, how ordinary women and men face their suffering, and in their suffering they find their strength.
They empower themselves.
They find their power, and I would love to do that.
Please go ahead, ma'am.
My name is Shihab. I am from Nablus. I am 70 years old. I have 10 children, but 2 of my sons were martyred. Everyone said I should be proud to be the mother of a martyr, but I was not proud. I was full of grief, like a bucket with unshed tears. I would keep running away to find a place where I could weep in peace. But my neighbors would keep finding me and bringing me back, and my husband was so ashamed, until I found the center of women. Here the women said, you are a mother. You have the right to weep for your children. You can express your grief. Can you imagine? Here, by sharing our stories and our suffering, we become community leaders. Now at my age, I am a community leader, and I go around Palestine from village to village, and I knock on the doors of women. I share my story, and I hear their stories, and I help them to become leaders so we can be strong and stand with dignity in the face of occupation.
فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا. يشير أحد المراقبين إلى أن الحقيقة تكمن في أول ضحية في زمن الحرب، لكن إن عمدنا إلى قول الحقيقة فإن النساء هن أول الضحايا. ولاحظت منظمة الأمم المتحدة للطفولة اليونيسف مؤخرا في مناطق الصراعات أن العنف الجنسي يستشري عادة كالوباء، سواء كانت حربا أهلية أو حرب أقطاب أو أي نوع من الصراعات المسلحة الأخرى، وغالبا في جميعها تصبح أجساد النساء جزءا من أرض المعركة. الدكتورة راما ماني كبيرة الباحثين في مركز الدراسات العالمية في جامعة أكسفورد تشرح كيف يمكن لأداء القصص الواقعية أن ينفخ الحياة في المواقع المختلفة من خلال أداء تلك القصص وجعل الناس يفهمون على نحو أكثر عمقا الأسباب الحقيقية والعواقب للقضايا السياسية الحالية المشتعلة.
As you said, you've pointed out how important the violence against women of all kinds is in conflict, but of course also in street and so-called peacetime. And what's been very powerful to see for me is that though my performances and teachings and so on are on many subjects, the question of women is always there. And to see how, whether it's a classroom with senior policymakers, diplomats, military officers, or a classroom in a university, or a conference dealing with conflict and so on, how the participants are so profoundly affected when they hear about the suffering that women in particular, whether it's girls or, like you said, old women undergo. Because suddenly, even if I am, a British policymaker or diplomat, and I hear the story of a Palestinian or a Rwandan woman, she suddenly becomes my sister or my mother. Mm-hmm. Because even though...
Is this really the case, Dr. Rama? Because we all know that policymakers, diplomats are to a certain extent detached from the people, detached from the grassroots. They have their own world.
You're touching on the heart. After 25 years of working in the international arena with diplomats around and with United Nations officials, I felt like you. I felt, how can it be that people are so detached and they've left their humanity with their jackets on the hook when they go in to discuss matters of life and death? Mm-hmm. I believe that theatre of transformation is this vehicle which enables them to reconnect. So the kinds of feedback I get, and you won't believe it, yes, women are affected. Yes, people in conflict, the victims and survivors of war are affected by my performances, but the ones who have come up to me in tears, whether I'm teaching a course using theatre of transformation or giving a performance in a huge hall with hundreds of people in the UN or somewhere else, men will come up to me who are probably ministers, policymakers, defense officials, and say, Rama or Dr. Mani, you made me weep. You reminded me of why I became a politician. You reminded me why I joined the UN. And they will then share what it was that changed something in them. Now, when I use this in my courses for policymakers, for example, that I teach, for an example, at the Geneva Center for Security Policy, I then work with that awakened state of humanity. So I get them to work in groups, to dialogue and say, what will you now do differently? How can we have a different policy dialogue now that you've connected all your knowledge and rational skills to your humanity again? Mm-hmm. How can we have policies that are actually not detached, but compassionate, conscious, and intelligent?
Mm-hmm. Now, what are the four main issues that the theatre of transformation, you talked about four main facets, attempts to address through performances?
So I've come around to the four issues. The boiling one, which you started off by mentioning, is the widespread nature of violence of all types, conflicts and wars of all types. So the transformation from conflict to coexistence is one major challenge. Showing the suffering, but like we discussed, showing how that suffering is being transformed and can be transformed to positive outcomes.
What about the other issues that you address through performance?
So the other one too, you've just referred to it, which is specifically the role of women, especially the violence against women that you talked about. Mm-hmm. But there's a continuum between the violence against women in countries in conflict, but also you look at Europe, North America, countries that are supposedly at peace and developed, 1 woman out of 3 being violated in her lifetime. But the continuum continues with her exclusion from decision making. So really what I call it is women for the world, which shows the way in which actually women are already redefining the paradigm of power. they are already realizing and seeing and showing that that power is not something to control others. Power comes from within us, which is why, as we said earlier, women suffer, but through their suffering, they find their strength. The third one is recognizing that the kind of leadership that we need for the future is very different from the patriarchal or top-down elite leadership we've seen. We're seeing a new kind of collective youth leadership, a pioneering leadership, which is not about me and mine, but which is for the collective interest, which wants to steward the planet and do things for the community. And the last one is really actually the bigger issue you started with, which is it's not just the problem of conflict. We are really in a situation of what I call dystopia. Nothing is functioning. Our economic systems, our political systems are disserving the public and the
divisions,
planet.
yes.
And so it's how can we transform the systems we have now into what I call our topia, so transforming dystopia to our topia, which would be a world of inclusion, where all of us could live together in harmony with the planet. So those are the 4 topics.
Those are the 4 topics, but I didn't see an approach of the children issue. It's a very important issue because, you know, usually, yes, women bear the brunt of the wars and the conflicts and the insecurities, but also the children. Now we have millions of children are turned into soldiers, into executioners. They are performing duties that are so much away from their innocence.
You're absolutely right, and that's why I really see the last issue I mentioned of transforming dystopia into our utopia, where listening to the visions of children and young people, because they haven't been tainted and conditioned as we have into believing that this is the way to do things.
Dr. Rama Mani, as the co-founder of Rising Women, Rising World, what does this bring about something new for the women?
You know, what Rising Women, Rising World is a global movement that's really starting up now of women from different backgrounds, disciplines, the media, the arts, politics, economics, who are really saying a different world is possible, and we have both the capacity to envision it, but also because of all of our experiences and strategies, we have the strategies and experience to realize it. And within this, a key part that I'm playing together with my colleagues like Dr. Leila Nicola in Lebanon, like Dr. Zahira Kamal in Palestine, with Professor Calypso Nicolaides in Oxford, is looking at how can we redesign politics and global governance so it really serves the people and the planet.
Right, Dr. Rama Mani, Counselor of the World Future Council and Senior Research Associate at the Center for International Studies at the University of Oxford and co-founder of Rising Women, Rising World. Thank you for this invigorating interview. You're most welcome, ma'am. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. للمزيد من التواصل بريدنا theinside@almayadeen.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل. من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.